Serious. What is your small-town dark secret story? Story 1. I don't know if it's considered a dark secret, but in the county I lived in from ages 10 to 18, we had a soldier die under some extremely questionable circumstances. They said he was high drunk and experiencing mental distress and raided a nursery, the plant kind. They claimed he was attacked by wasps and ran. He called 911 several times and claimed that someone was chasing him and was trying to kidnap him. In the last 911 call, he said everything was fine suddenly. Just 14 to 15 minutes later, he was struck by a woman who stopped and called 911. He was ran over 2 more times and died. The autopsy showed no signs of bee or wasp stings. The connection to the nursery is due to the fact that it was just up the road from where he died. The place was ransacked, pizza eaten, money taken, but his wallet and phone were sitting on the counter, undisturbed. However, the family was not okay with that explanation, especially because he had previously texted that there were some problems with the local boys since the soldier wasn't from this part of the state. So the family had a private investigator look into it. They analyzed the 911 call recordings and found several instances of other people talking in the background, though most of it couldn't be made out, except one. In the 911 call where he told the operator that everything was fine, a male voice could be heard saying "tell her." And the nursery, there was no DNA, no fingerprints, no footprints that lead back to the soldier, even though his phone and wallet were there in the building. A lot of people, his family included, think he was killed by some of the local guys there after they got into a fight about something. They chased him down and caught him. He was able to run again after the final 911 call, and was hit by a driver while trying to get help. And the police in the county covered the entire thing up because the boys involved were connected to the department somehow. Of the 3 drivers, none were charged for running over him. I think only the first driver stopped, but it was discovered that one of the other drivers was connected to the department either through family or friendship. It's a crazy story, but you can look it up. Just search Austin Miguel. I wouldn't be too surprised since there is a lot of shady stuff happening in small-town police departments, including covering up rapes that officers commit. I really hope his family gets him justice. Story 2. No one thought to look there. About a decade ago, there was a crime spike here. It was really bad because one cartel tried to displace the other, and because we're a sleepy town across the border from the US, we're prime cartel real estate. However, when they weren't tearing each other up in the streets, they would abduct, interrogate, kill, and dispose of the bodies of their rivals until eventually one cartel managed to keep the town. One thing that baffled the authorities was their stealth. They came out of nowhere, struck their target, and vanished into the shadows. That may be possible for a small unit or even a lone agent, but that's unheard of in a cartel. Federal investigations were made, and no one was able to find the cartel's headquarters. It had to be big because they had weapons, vehicles, metal shops, dorms, kitchens, and the corpse disposal equipment. They looked everywhere. Nearby ranches, warehouses, junkyards, nothing. Until they looked where no one thought to look. A few kilometers outside of here is a fully operational state prison that they were using as their headquarters. Everyone was in on it, from the inmates to the guards, to the warden, to the governor. People were killed there, dissolved in acid, and the drums were dumped in a nearby river. Since then, the prison operation has been shut down, and the former governor is a wanted man by the Interpol. Edit. Spelling corrected. For those asking, this is not Juarez in the state of Chihuahua. Juarez has had its share of atrocities, but I've never lived there nor know the specifics of its crime habits. While not the town mentioned, it's entirely possible for Juarez to have suffered crimes with the same MO. The town I'm talking about is Piedras Negras in the state of Coahuila. It's a city of less than 200,000 population. Across the border from Eagle Pass in Texas, another small town of 9 square miles, situated between Laredo and Del Rio. I'd also wish to make a correction about 2 statements. First is that the bodies were not dissolved in acid, but burnt to ashes inside steel drums. The ashes were thrown in a river a few kilometers away. Over 100 people were disposed of this way. Forensic authorities have combed the river, finding small bone fragments and testing their DNA. As of 2016, 9 have been identified. Second, there is a dispute over the governor responsible. At that time, the governor of the state was Humberto Moreira. However, he resigned before finishing his term so he could run for another office, which he lost. Because he resigned, a provisional governor was assigned named George Torres. During this time, there was absolute media silence regarding the matter, either because of bureaucratic stonewalling, cartel threats, or government payoffs. However, a national magazine called Proceso wrote an article about the crimes being committed in the state, and Moreira ordered all copies of the magazine removed from newsstands. When the problems in the state started to surface, they both left the country. Moreira got a scholarship to study in Spain, which no one was able to identify the source, and he also lived in a chalet that had a monthly rent higher than his salary as governor. Meanwhile, Torres fled to the U.S. Moreira managed to transfer the blame of all the wrongdoings of his administration onto Torres. Moreira was arrested by the Interpol a few years back, charged with money laundering. Incredible as it may seem, the Spanish authorities handed him over to Mexico, where he has lived as a free man, going as far as to create his own political party. No charges of any crime have ever been brought on him, and he maintains his claim of innocence. Since his return, he has never left the country. To mock his claim, one senator went so far as to invite him to the Super Bowl with all expenses paid. Moreira, fearing the Interpol, passed on the invitation. The senator tweeted a picture of the empty seat. Meanwhile, Torres was caught in the U.S. and also faced charges for money laundering. He pleaded guilty in summer of this year. It's worth noting that Torres' testimony gives details as to the cartel's operations during Moreira's administration, including the protection they received and the times, dates, and sums of bribes paid. The Mexican government never included these statements as part of their investigation. There's a video of a report in Spanish by a national news source detailing the prison's activities. If anyone wants to check out, video link is in the description. Story 3. We had a crazy rich guy from the 1600s to 1700s who saw people robbing a grave one night, so decided that when he died, he would be laid to rest in the roof of a barn behind his house. He believed he'd only be dead for 30 years, so requested that they lock the barn and put the key in his coffin so he could get out, but nobody could get in. He requested that whoever inherited his house, fortune, and belongings would have to give them back to him when he resurrected. He did actually get his wish, but of course he was never resurrected. People stole his bones, and his house is a dentist now. Story 4. This was around 15 years ago, but there was a sheriff's deputy that was seemingly a really cool guy. Friendly, cracked a lot of great jokes, etc. He was working at the local high school as a school resource officer and was apparently almost universally well regarded. Well, it turns out that he repeatedly raped a 14-year-old. He told the boy that he'd kill his parents if he reported the officer. I don't remember all the details, but I believe this went on for weeks or months before it was found out, and the officer was arrested and eventually went to prison. Story 5. Two sisters got picked up by a group of men. Both were raped and thrown off a bridge that is 45 minutes outside of town. One sister survived, but later in life went back and jumped off the bridge. Story 6. This is more comical than dark. A house burned down in this small town of 600 population, 1 block from the fire station. It being a volunteer fire department, nobody was at the station. They tried to get the pumper truck out, but one of the volunteers had run it into a brick building the week before, and it was still at the shop. We're still undecided whether the house owner burned it down for the insurance. Strange that there was nothing valuable inside. Story 7. 15 years ago, the local district attorney called his longtime girlfriend and told her he was taking the day off from work and that he loved her. He parked his car in town and went for a stroll past the local shops. He hasn't been seen since. His car was found where he had parked it the next day. He had left his cell phone in the car, but his keys and wallet were missing. Later that year, his laptop and its hard drive was found under a bridge at a nearby river. The hard drive was eventually discovered by a local woman walking along the bank of the river, but it was too damaged to recover any data from. Interestingly, investigators discovered that someone had done a search on his home computer for how to wreck a hard drive. Did he jump from a local bridge? Did he encounter someone whom he had prosecuted who did him harm? Or did he escape his life to start a new one? Story 8. About 10 years ago, a lot of homeless people disappeared, and when the police did the investigation, they found out a guy was kidnapping and eating those people. Police found his hideout and found a half-eaten body and bones from another person. People don't like to talk about it, but everyone knows what happened. Story 9. Oh, I have a doozy. Short version, popular kids in high school run a secret towel fight club and accidentally kill one of their friends in the house of a local politician who proceeds to bury the story. Towel fight club. Tape towels over your hands and beat each other up. It's supposed to be just boxing, but it sounds like they got out of control and hardly could call it that. Story 10. This is a sad one to me. There was an older couple here who ran a halfway house for troubled kids who'd recently gotten out of juvie. They fostered a few as well. They were loved in the community, wonderful people. One of them had an older brother who was a gang banger in the nearest big city. During a visit, he snuck his 15-year-old younger bro a handgun. Younger bro ended up holding up a local gas station and killed 3 people. One of them was my friend's cousin. The foster parents lost whatever credentials they needed to do what they did. The kids went back into the system, and the giant house has been abandoned since around 2009. Story 11. About 30 years ago, a local 8-year-old girl went missing during the annual carnival downtown. After a few days, they found a suspect that was seen near the girl right before she went missing. The guy confessed to her horrific murder and rape and torture. He was the kid's next-door neighbor and friend to the kid's dad. I'll spare the details, but it was really bad. He was convicted and sentenced to 40 years or so. After 8 years, he was paroled and returned to the same house with his parents, right next door to the family of the girl and former friend. Laws were a bit different then. About a week later, the man never showed up at his parole office. His parents filed a missing persons report. Rumor has it that several friends of the victim's father took care of him. If you talk to them, they just say that they are sure that he won't be back. Story 12. Something similar happened in my town. Guy owned a bar across the street from his house where he lived with his wife, daughter, and granddaughter of 5. He had a contractor working on the house. Grandma, who took care of the child during the day, thought it would be no big deal leaving the child sleeping while she went quickly to the market. Next thing is the grandpa sees the contractor running to his car and leaving the house. Curious, he went home to find out what happened, only to find his granddaughter crying with blood between her legs. After the grandmother came back, he left the child with her, went back to the bar, got his gun, and threw the keys to one of his regulars, asking him to close the bar because he had to kill someone. When he arrived at the contractor's home, he wasn't there. He then spent the next 2 weeks surveying his home 24/7, until the rapist probably thought the cost was clear and returns home. Grandpa sees him, breaks the door, kills the guy in front of his parents, then leaves, going directly to the precinct where he surrenders his gun and makes a full confession detailing everything. He was tried for premeditated murder. Prosecution had all the evidence. Testimony from his friends and parents of the rapist, the murder weapon, his confession. It was a close and shut case. The jury voted 7-0 not guilty. In Brazil, there are 7 jurors and you only need a majority to convict, and not unanimous like the US. Story 13. The town I was raised in wasn't exactly small, but here's the one dark secret I know. My hometown was where lots and lots of sports players had their mansions. And so, of course, their wives and children were out and about in the community a lot. Every single sports player's wife in that town is heavily addicted to opioids. Every single one. Opioid addiction is obviously an epidemic all over the country, but among the rich wives in the town, it had a 100% infection rate, so to speak. I know because one of my friend's mom was the hairdresser for basically every single one of those wives. I was homeless my senior year of high school, and one of the sports player wives heard about me from her, and she gifted me an iPhone. That phone was pennies to her, but I still wish I'd expressed my thanks more, because that wife died of an overdose not long after. Sorry if that wasn't much of a dark secret, but yeah. Story 14. About 40% of my hometown was homeless. No one had jobs, no one could afford any kind of housing situation. Neighbors paid for heat where they could on houses people were squatting in, and everyone invited everyone else over for dinner every night. We didn't know who was homeless, we just did it. We hired anyone and everyone for odd jobs. A lot of people just lived as they would when they were kids. Keep the fireplace going with trees you chop down, gathered water by the well, and traded farmed and trapped for food. I went to school with a lot of homeless kids. We had, looking back, the most robust school breakfast program I ever heard of. I thought it was normal for over half the school to show up until I moved to the city. You just gave people the dignity they deserved. No one was ashamed if they dropped out at grade 10. We all knew that if they needed the job, they should take it. Looking back, I realize how wild it is. Our town was so poor no one was treated any different by me, and mine at least. Sure, there were some rich people, but they overwhelmingly went to the other school. And there were no panhandlers, no beggars. Nothing like that. I was just told the busies were coming over for dinner. Did I like them? No. I kind of think they were dicks, but never did I make them feel uncomfortable, and most just ate, had some tea, and left. And if that doesn't tickle your fancy, a whale washed up on shore one week and all the guys in the local high school took turns having sex with it. All of them. Edit. To clarify, the whale part happened after I graduated in a few years. It was a very public thing when it was happening, and no one likes to talk about it since. Story 15. We have a vineyard hill next to our village. On that hill there's a big wooden cross. Lots of people go there to drink, have a walk, or with their dogs, but almost nobody knows why the cross is here. During war, a vineyard keeper lived there with his son. His son was recruited, and the man was left alone. When war ended, his son survived and wanted to prank his dad by sneaking on him at night. But the vineyard keeper saw him and thought he was a robber. So he grabbed his rifle and shot the robber when he found out it was his son. It broke his heart. He dug a grave on top of the hill for his son and erected a big wooden cross next to the grave. When he was done, he laid next to his son and shot himself. From that day, no one worked on the vineyards, and there's a big wooden cross on top of the hill. Now, you can't even recognize there's a grave. Story 16. As a teen in high school, the health teacher got caught sleeping with students. Everyone magically passed that year, including me, who skipped almost every day. Then a few years ago, in another small town, 2 different scandals within the space of 5 years. First one, teachers at a preschool were dosing children with melatonin at nap time. Second one, a very well-known and respected funeral home went under investigation for selling body parts. Edit. To clarify, events were in different towns. Story 17. There was a woman who was cheating on her husband and got pregnant with him. When she had the child, it was quite clearly not the husband's child, so he kicked her out of the house. The woman broke down and went out drinking. Then when she was about to return to her husband, she picked her baby up, dropped it down a rubbish chute, and left it there. The next morning, she remembered what she did and went back to find the baby. But of course, only people with access to the chute can go inside, so she had to wait hours, possibly days, for someone to unlock it and go inside. The baby was long dead by then. The woman killed herself shortly after. This developed into a ghost story later. People say you can hear the baby crying from inside the rubbish chute, and you can hear the woman crying on one of the stairways. Story 18. A freshman with Asperger's was being abused by his family at home. He was a problem child and got in trouble on purpose, but no one went too hard on him because of his home life. He was a well-loved kid at school and in the community. One day, just before holiday break in December, he was really sick, but his mom sent him to school anyway. Locked him out of the house. He decided to try and get into one of the empty houses down the street, through the chimney. Now this kid was the size of a second grader, but he was too big to fit through since chimneys taper down thinner. Mom never answered her phone when the school reported him missing. Went a whole day without reporting her kid missing. No one knew what happened to him. It was about a month and a half before we knew what happened to him. We all thought he ran away, was alive somewhere. Maybe went to his sister's house. Nope. Dead in a chimney. The schools organized an entire week of counseling and such. They wore pink for a day and little pink ribbons on pins for him since his favorite color was pink. Everyone was hit really hard by it. That's how our small town started 2020. Story 19. Not too dark, but yeah, shady AF. Guy, blue collar, but running for a local political office, comes home to his wife of 7 years. Finds her being shagged by some guy. He whips out a gun and shoots the guy a few times. The man survives. Finds out that his wife was cheating on him, and it wasn't rape. Here is where it gets dirty. So, the police want to press charges against him for attempted murder, since they say he knew his wife played around. So the DA comes to him and tells him to stop running for office and withdraw. He does, and the charges go away. No crime here, folks. Story 20. This event was so bad, Coatesville was removed from maps for a bit. I borrowed this from our Wikipedia page. In August 1911, steelworker Zachariah Walker was lynched in Coatesville. He had left his wife and children in Virginia while seeking better work. This African-American man was accused of killing Deputy Constable / coal and lawn policeman Edgar Rice, a popular figure in town. Walker claimed self-defense and was hospitalized after his arrest. He was dragged from the hospital and burned to death in front of a mob of hundreds in a field south of the city. 15 men and teenage boys were indicted, but all were acquitted at trials. The lynching was the last in Pennsylvania and is said to have left a permanent stain on the city's image. Story 21. There's a half-submerged submarine from the war in the bay where I live. You can walk out to it when the tide is out. In the late 80s, somebody cut open the hatch. One of the only visible parts left sticking out the sand, climbed in, and was having a look around. The tide came in, and he drowned. If I remember rightly, the whole hatch was filled with cement, then welded shut to stop it happening again.